All right, you're going up there. See you when you get back. In this video, I'll be covering every single step in detail on how to turn your RAD Lion 7-inch long-range FPV frame into this. A powerful yet efficient 7-inch long-range build capable of flying 24 kilometers or more with a full-size GoPro, and even more than that without a GoPro, of course. The frame you'll see in the video is going to look slightly different than this. The release version has had a little bit of improvement to the top plate. I made these battery strap slots a little bit longer, a little bigger, to accommodate different positions for different batteries. And I'm also changing this 20x20 mount. It ends up being a 20x20 if you use the 2 press nuts from the arms, but I'm going to skip using those and take these 2 holes out and make a new 20x20 further back using M2 countersunk fasteners. All right, so to start here for the build, you need to remove our top plate and all of our 3D prints. We'll start putting the 3D prints back on one at a time as we attach the components that use them to the flight controller later. So now I've also got my stack screws in, which you have to do before assembling the frame or putting the bottom plate on. There's holes there, but you know, the screws won't fit through, or the bolts won't fit through, but you can use them to tighten them later. I always use a 25mm stack screw for this build. And I've started with just like the regular plastic nylon nut there connected to the stack screw to hold it tight to start. And I've prepped a couple of the motors already. I've prepped the front motors here. I'll just do the back ones here for you so you can see. So for the wires, for the front ones, let's start off with the wire cover. For the front, I cut the wire cover to 95mm, and I cut the motor wires to 130mm. For the back, I cut the wire cover to, I also cut it to 95mm, but I cut the motor wires to 140mm. And then I've cut all the pieces of heat shrink in half to shrink over the ends here to keep this nice and neat. So the secret to getting this stuff on is just always pushing from the back, because then it'll open up and you'll kind of get to a point where it won't really want to go anymore. And make sure you hold this part down so it doesn't keep fraying open too much. And then you can push this from the back again and grab the wires inside and let this part work along a bit, and then just do that a couple times. It's okay if this gets frayed or opens up a little bit, because the heat shrink will help hold it in place. I just don't want it to do it too much. And I like my my builds to be really neat, so I'm going to straighten out my motor wires and make sure that they sit nice and flat all the way through. I like to get my motor wire to where it's just touching the heat shrink that comes off the motor. Get that shrunk in place before anything moves on us. There's some thick heat shrink they give you with this. It really takes a bit of heat. If you use a lighter to do this, make sure you don't melt the plastic braid covering the wires. There we go, that one's done. And just repeat that for all three of your motors. I'm gonna get my my last one done here, and then we'll come back for the next part. So I've got all the motors attached to the frame now. I've just used the 10mm long motor fasteners that come with the frame package. Fasten them on the outside. Just to make sure that the motor fasteners are not going to hit wires inside the bottom of your motor when you're doing those up. I'm not going to put the braces on for now because they'll just kind of get in the way and make the quad harder to move around and stuff. I'll just put those on at the end. The motors will stay in place for now with just those two fasteners. Just like I was saying before, I have the 25mm stack screw with one of the plastic nylon nuts on there. And I'm going to use one of these little spacer things I got with a different flight controller package. Unfortunately, the T-Motor ones don't come with spacers, just the set of gummies for the flight controller and for the ESC. One of my XT60 is going to have two wires going to the bottom side of the ESC, because this build's going to have two XT60s, and then the other one is going to go on top. This is just going to make it easier so I don't have to try to squeeze double wires on one side of it. So I'm using two XT60s because with this frame, to use 6S 2P batteries, you fit one 6S pack on top and the other 6S pack underneath. And then one XT60 comes around and connects to the standoff here, and the other one goes underneath like that. So I've got my XT60s here cut to 110mm for both XT60s. Now what I've done is actually made one of them, I made the ground slightly longer, and one of them I made the positive slightly longer. Now this is so that when I connect it up, so this side is positive, that side's ground, so the one with the longer positive is going to go underneath like this. Having the one of them just a little bit longer when it goes off to the side like that just makes things fold around and stuff a little bit more neatly. So one of the hardest things to do for the soldering is to attach the XT60s to the ESC. I'm going to get that out of the way first and then move on to doing the motor wires. I've got a larger chisel tip on here. I think this is a 3.5mm or something like that. And I've got the temperature on my soldering station turned up to 880 Fahrenheit, I guess that is. At that temperature, you don't want to hold this on things for too long, but it should heat up and melt stuff pretty quickly. But the ESCs nowadays are getting so thick, they have so much copper in the traces to pass the energy around that, like on a 55 amp, 60 amp ESC, if you don't have a really hot soldering iron, you're just going to touch the soldering iron to it and it's going to kind of stick there and not really, because the heat's just going to get sucked out of it right away. So you actually need a good soldering station for these big ESCs. So I'm going to start with just getting both sides tinned up. If you want, there is two holes for direct connecting a capacitor, but I'm going to snip the capacitor wires and add other soft wires, some 16 gauge or something like that, and put my capacitor just a little bit back. It's going to end up going probably around about there. But I'm going to snip these and use some 16 or 18 gauge wire. And be really careful on this side that you don't get any solder touching these wires on the FETs or these chips right here. You always want to double check your solder job. Anytime you're working on an ESC, it's really important. All right, everything looks good. So it's just, like I was saying, the one with the longer positive on it is going to go underneath like this, go over that way. Let's flip things over and solder it like this for now. So it's going to be going like that. I'm going to inspect those now, make sure they look like good solid connections. Like the solder's flowing around everything. I think those look pretty good. I don't know if that's going to show up there, but so there's a little risk that these bottom ones are going to want to come unsoldered when I do these upper ones. Maybe that'll help hold them a little bit if they start getting loose when I try to do this one. It looks really good on this side. Let's take a look underneath and see if anything moved. I still have pretty good space underneath the wires there. I wonder if I could take out those spacers. I think that still works there. That's an acceptable gap. I don't think there's any way that I could hit if I had a crash. And maybe if my ESC smashed, but pushing the gummies down doesn't really move, so. Okay, I guess I'm going to do it like that. No need for the spacers I said I used. Alright, so the capacitor is going to sit on there like that. I know I was going to think about putting some wires on it. You know what, I'm just going to solder the capacitor directly here. It's going to be really close and it's not really going to ever move around. So obviously, just like everything else, double or triple check the polarity. Make sure you're putting it the right way around. So this, you want to get a good solid connection, but you don't want to heat things up enough that one of the other wires comes off. Yeah, that maybe isn't perfectly bonded here. It doesn't look like the best bond between them. I can see kind of a line, so. That's definitely all. I definitely saw the solder all flow there for a big section, so That's well attached now. I guess I'll use this tip. I think before I solder the motors on, I'm going to switch the tip on my soldering iron, but I might as well get this tinned up with this one. Do 3 of them. So I'm doing 3 of them and then cleaning my soldering iron. And also I want to let the ESC cool down a little bit. Yeah, I'll swap and do 3 on the other side. And let that cool off for a minute. All right. Now that's done, I'm going to check that these all look good, that nothing's bridged and no solders bridged over to one of the chips or FETs right near the ESC pads. That is okay. It is very important to make sure. Oh, here's seeing there's just a couple here where I could get the soldered joint to the circuit board a little better there. All right, that all looks good now. I'm not going to worry about the underside. I was noticing the underside was actually conformal coated as well. I mean, you could just solder right through it if you want, but that'll have to be redone though. All right, I'm going to change this soldering iron tip to something a little bit smaller. All right, I've already attached the front motor wires, and then I've taken off some of the heat shrink and tinned up the one motor wire here for the back. I'm just going to tin up this last one. And I'll have put a note earlier, but yeah, I should have made my motor wires a little bit longer. Probably should have made them 135 for the front and 145 for the back. Just really taking my time to make sure I get it all set up just nice the way I want it. Oh, and I should mention now about the method I'm doing here. So soldering them this way is probably more of an advanced soldering method, because now you can't really see behind the wire to see if you've got solder going back and connecting to one of the FETs, which will melt everything. Like it'll melt the motor when you try to power it up if you get solder connected to one of those FETs back there. So this is kind of more an advanced one, an advanced way of doing it. For those of you that are newer to soldering or not as confident or comfortable with it, I suggest you do your motor wires like this. Let's see if I can hold up yeah, I suggest you do them like that if you're not really confident about your soldering skills. That'll be much safer and easier. Then you can see and make sure you're not bridging to any of those things in the back. Now, one of the reasons I'm feeling okay about doing this way is because I'm not really heating this ESC up like crazy using it for long range. If I was doing like a 7-inch freestyle build or something, then I may not want to have the wires going and covering up part of the heatsink on top here. Probably better to have them on the outside. But this thing's not really going to be getting crazy hot. This is what I was saying. I needed my wires to be a little bit longer. It's still going to work, but it's going to have to go on the inside of the standoff that goes in here. I was hoping to go on the other side of it. All right, that's the all of the ESC done and all the motors. So I think what I'm going to do now, lift this up. That's good enough. Now I'm going to flip it over and do the waterproofing. This was a conformal coated ESC, so all I'm going to do is get the bottoms of these tabs, and I'm going to just get this first row of pins on the FETs there in case I melted that, because it's really close to the because it's really close to where I've been soldering. You really don't need to use a lot here, just like a good swipe like that. I'll maybe get some more on it while I'm going in between everything here. All right. For the other side now. I can't show this on camera because I have to pick the quad up and look at it better to do it. But I'm going to reach through underneath, looking at it like this. I'm going to look inside and try to get the bottom side of all the power pads there. Then I'm gonna do that part off camera. And so that's the power tabs done. Now I'm just going to cover the rest of the motor tabs here. I guess I kind of made it hard for myself doing it that way, having to try to get it to flow through in the back there, but I think this will do. Oh yeah, I can see the brush bristles getting in behind there. All right, so I'm just going to do that again on the other side and then catch the bottom of that power tab like I was saying. And that'll be everything for the ESC and the motors and XT60s and capacitor, all done. All right, so we've got the motors and ESC all finished, waterproofed with the XT60s and the capacitor done. So now next I'm going to move on to the flight controller. So for the stack, remember we had a nut on the very bottom, then there's the ESC with its gummy mount. And then I've used a 5mm plastic nut and a 2mm silicone spacer. Those didn't come with these packets, but I just had them laying around from leftover from other builds. So now in the flight controller package, I get get all the instructions, like so it's going to show us where we need to connect everything. I've already mounted my gummies on the corners of the flight controller. So this one's a little bit different than some in the way that it mounts with the wiring harness sticking out the back. So the arrow is pointing forward here. I guess it could just be mounted the other way around, and then in Betaflight or iNav you could tell it to that you've turned your flight controller around. But just to keep things easy for people, I'm going to mount it like this, the way it's intended. So also in that packet, you get some more stickers. And I think this might be, there's another piece of paper that I think might be a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth password. And you get an assortment of wiring harnesses and some plugs for the end of them. So there's one that's here for a DJI setup. And I'm sure I'll have mentioned already before in here, but this won't fit, this quad or this frame doesn't fit an air unit, but it will fit a Vista in the back. You just have to keep that in mind as you're doing your XT60 leads. And I guess your capacitor would have to go somewhere else, like on your XT60 lead at the battery, or mounted off the side, maybe along the arm somewhere possibly. So since this flight controller is intended for, or can be used for X8 builds, it's got one big wiring harness for 8 motors. It's got a wiring harness for the DJI. It also comes with wiring harness meant for connecting with 8 motors. So I'm going to use this one. And I've already started putting it together here with one of the 10-pin connectors that it comes with. So to make sure I don't do any of this wrong, I'm going to plug this into the flight controller and then look at the pinout on the ESC. It's written right on both of them, so it makes it nice and easy. So I've already got the first two done here. Telemetry and current. So the purple wire is R4 on the flight controller. So that goes to telemetry on this side, the top one. Current is the yellow one. So that goes to the second pin in on this one. And then it's motor 1, 2, 3, 4. And same thing on here, it's motor 1, 2, 3, 4. Which is these 4 white wires. So I'm just going to connect these ones all up in order. For this harness, there's kind of like a big end here. This wide end is where the pins go into. So the pins are on the top here. So I put the wide end upwards this way. And this is really hard to do with the camera right in front of me. Make sure that's clicked in there properly. And just keep going through all the rest of them. All right, that's all the motors done now. And then after the motors, it's plus 10 volt, and then battery, and then ground and ground. So the plus 10 volt is a voltage output to power something. If you wanted to use that to power, like say an SMO 4K or something like that, you could always cut 2 of the wires off of this harness and just plug them into the 10 volt and one of the grounds and use that to power your SMO 4K or something like that. But I'm not going to be doing that, or I can always add that later too. Because I could just plug them into this harness later on. But for now, I'm not going to use it. So the 2 that are left here are going to be ground and battery voltage. So the bottom 2 are both ground. So I'm just going to put this in the very bottom one. So now the battery plus goes, there should be 3 spots left now, and the battery plus goes right in the middle of them. All right, I can unplug this from the flight controller now. I'll make this a bit easier. Now double check, make sure you've got them all correct, because this is one you don't want to get wrong. It'll end up mounting like this. So now I want to check and make sure that there's no wires can be bouncing off the flight controller while I'm flying. So I'm just looking that maybe I might even connect something to these wires here to keep them from going up. Yeah, I think I might hold them down. See how they're going up and down? I might hold them down like that and put a little bit of hot glue on them to keep them in place. So the rest of that looks good. My motor wires are clean, and neat enough that they're not touching the flight controller anywhere. So I think that height is good. If I needed to, I have enough length here on these stack screws that I could put another 2mm spacer in there and still fit a nut on here, but I think I'm good like that. I'm just going to take this all apart now that I know it's going to work. Works out nicely. And this would be a good time to do the conformal coating on the flight controller, at least for the bottom side. After soldering up things to these inputs, any conformal coating done down here will be ruined. So I don't know. I think I'll maybe do a quick layer across these anyways, but after I've finished soldering to the top, I'll have to make sure I get the conformal coating another layer in down underneath here. But for now, I'm just going to do the bottom side. The bottom side's got the barometer on it. So I've cut myself a tiny little piece of tape that I'm going to put over top of the barometer. The barometer is this kind of silver box here with a little, you can see a little tiny hole in the corner. So I'm just going to cover that up and make sure I get this little tiny hole covered. Okay, I think that's pretty well in place there now. I'll give it a good press with my finger. So I'm going to try to avoid, putting a bunch of conformal coating right over that spot. I'm just going to go kind of around the edges of it and make sure I don't cover that. And don't go crazy with the conformal coating here. It'll make doing any work on this flight controller later on. It'll make it hard. Stay away from the barometer there. Just go to the edge of it and leave it. You don't want to go a lot around the edge of it either, because this conformal coating kind of creeps up surfaces and fills in gaps. So. I'm just going to do a quick coat over the pads, which I know I'm going to have to redo again later, but that's this side finished. So I'm just going to sit that on top here, and I'm not going to push it down. I'm just going to let it stay up in the air there for a while and dry before it, just in case it touches anything. I don't want the conformal coating to get wiped off, so I'm just going to leave it like that to dry for a while. All right, then once that's ready, I'm going to get this wiring harness put on. Okay, so well, I did this off camera here. I held this back and put a little strip of hot glue in there, and then put this back over so the glue is in between the wires, and then just kind of push the wires down into the glue. So now that keeps them nice and see if I can squeeze that in there. Keeps them away from the flight controller. I'm not sure if that's completely necessary, but I just like to make sure there's no wires banging around on the flight controller to interfere with the gyro. All right, so now we can start connecting things up to the flight controller. I just want to add here that for people using DJI, the air unit doesn't fit, but you can fit a Vista in here in the back. And I would suggest probably connecting your plug in there and then maybe going underneath everything with your Vista cable and then plugging into the back of it here, because you'd be plugging in sort of right in here behind underneath the front of the capacitor is where you'll end up having to plug the Vista in. All right, so ready to start connecting things to the flight controller. All right, I guess let's start with the FPV system first. So I'm going to plug the cable for the camera in. All right, so now I've peeled the little back sticker thing off, and I'm going to conformal coat all this, and just be careful not to get too much around the plug. This part's a 1.5 millimeter driver for this. Just gonna thread these through the FPV camera nuts. I just want to see if this is dry in the back now. So I'm gonna stick this back on. All right, that's on there again. I guess I'll have to get my my front standoffs put in now. Well, I guess since I'm installing my front standoffs, I'm just going to install the front Immortal T-mount at the same time. So there's two different versions of this mount. The one I'm using here has a 5mm standoff inside of it. So this way the screw goes on, when the screw goes in, this washer here goes tight to the standoff, and then the standoff goes tight to the carbon. So there's no sort of squishy TPU in between the fastener and the frame. It's a good hard fit. But there's also a regular version of this mount, so you can, you know, skip this extra little bit of hardware and just squeeze the TPU with the fastener if you want. But I'm going to use this one. You need to make sure though that the standoff is tightly fastened all the way on before you screw anything else on. There's no squeezing TPU, it just locks in tight. All right, now we're able to mount the camera. So here we have ground and camera control, or menu. The black is ground and purple is the camera control. And then red is 5 to 36 volts, I think it is. I'm just going to connect it to the 5 volt. Black is ground and yellow is video. And as it says here on the sheet that came with the flight controller, I'm just going to hook all of these things up just exactly how they say. So this one, I'm not going to use the VBAT. I'm just going to use 5 to 36 volt. You can only hook up one of those, not both. So I'm going to hook up the 5 volt and ground and video. And then I will also hook up the menu or camera control to the one on the end here. So I'm going to leave myself a little bit of slack on the wires. I don't really need a whole bunch though. It's pretty close. And the camera control can pretty much stay full length. I don't normally use the camera control hooked up to the flight controller. I've always just plugged in my menu thing and set it once and left it like that. But, so I'm not actually sure if I have to hook up this ground that's with it or not. It'll be pretty easy to figure out though. All right, my soldering iron's heated up. So I'm gonna get all these tinned. Here's a good tip. It's actually it's not a good idea to tin your wires over top of the flight controller or an ESC because some solder could splatter off and land on something and cause it to short. So I'm also going to tin up the pads that I'm going to be using for the camera and VTX here now as well. I guess for now I'm not going to hook up this ground on here. I'm just going to hook up the camera control, and then if it doesn't work, I'll try hooking up the ground. So the first one's purple for the camera control. Next one's 5 volts, so the red wire. And then we skip the one that says bat. And I'm going to do ground, so the black wire to the ground pad. And then yellow, the last wire, goes to the VI, so video in. Alright then, now I'll do the VTX. So Rush, I don't know, this is a Solo 1 watt VTX. This wire is barely long enough for a 5-inch quad. I don't know how they think you're going to use this to hook up a 7-inch quad with this thing. That's kind of a, they could have spent another 3 cents and made the wires 20 millimeters longer. So lucky for us, T-Motor has included, if you're using DJI, this isn't going to be a worry because you're going to use your air unit cable. But for us doing analog with the Solo VTX, you can also use the air unit cable. The side that would be going into the flight controller fits perfectly into the VTX. Unfortunately, the wire colors, the color code for the wires is going to be all wrong. So we're going to have to be very sure to look at the pin out each time we connect up one of these wires and make sure we don't get it wrong. Actually, what I'm going to probably do here, I think, is just stop the camera for a minute, and I'm going to go and write these all down, what the colors are and what each color is, and write them out in order on a sheet of paper. So then that way I can have my VTX mounted down like this and just still be able to hook all the wires up without needing to read the back of it. Because I'm going to have it down here underneath the capacitor. It goes up on a little bit of a piece of foam to lift it up in the air a bit so it gets over these other press nuts. And it's going to sit right there. I'm going to want my VTX wires going out the other side though, because the VTX is hooks up over on this side here. I think I might go over on the outside like that with my wires. Yeah, I'll probably run them something like this. And then use a little bit of sticky tape or hot glue to hold them down to the flight controller here after I've got them all soldered up. So I'm going to start with a double thick layer of double-sided foam tape here on the bottom, because I want to put a double layer so that it lifts it up over higher than these press nuts here. Oh, and before I forget, I'm going to write down the pin out and the wires here before I cover over it. Alright, so I've got the wires for the VTX written down and labeled how I was labeled which one was which for the colors. And out of the black and the white are my 5 volt out and ground, so I'm not going to use those. Probably just going to like put some heat shrink over them and tuck them under the side here and tape them there or something. The ones that I am using, so the DC in, ground, video in, and data or smart audio. Those ones I've got cut to size. I'm gonna route them like this. Yeah, and then I'll probably hot glue them down after I conformal coat the top of the flight controller. So for now, I'm just going to solder them on with them coming over like that. And see, according to the paper that came with the flight controller again here, the VTX is going video out and then TX1, so that'll be smart audio, or it was labeled data on the Solo VTX. So video out, data, 10 volt, and ground. So the video out was the red wire. Let's get these tinned up first. So the red wire was my video. The next one is T1, so that's data. Data was the gray one. And then 10 volt. So that's DC in. DC in was yellow. And then ground. And ground was the brown wire. All right, now I'm just going to inspect that and make sure it's all good and there's no solder bridging any of the pads. So I forgot to twist my wires, so I'm going to disconnect all of those, twist them, and then connect them all up again. All right, now with the video system set up, the next thing to do here is going to be the let's just keep going down the list on the paper that comes with the flight controller, going by the UARTs. So we've done the VTX and the camera. Let's do the receiver now. And so for all of these parts, I'm going to just install them exactly the way the paper here says. So for the Crossfire receiver, it's going to go to 5 volt, ground, TX2, and RX2. All right, so I just double checked, and they do have it listed the same way as TBS does for the Diversity Nano wiring instructions. So channel 1 goes to RX, and channel 2 goes to TX. So we can just follow this exactly. All right, so we can get rid of these. I've got like just a big bunch of these sitting around. I don't use them for anything. Our receiver, more than enough wires for what we need, and a little piece of heat shrink. Following the instructions for the TBS receiver, it's on the bottom left here. Ground, 5 volt, channel 1, channel 2. We're going to use gray and yellow for the gray for channel 1 and yellow for channel 2. So we need red and black for 5 volt and ground. One gray wire for channel 1, and I think was it yellow for channel 2. Move that aside, get these wires connected to the receiver. Just gonna put the silicone mat down so I can solder right to this, right on the table. The wires are already cut at the end and tinned, but I'm going to tin them up again so that I know it's the same solder as what I'm using. So I just need to tin the first 4, starting at the bottom on the left side here. Alright, so it's ground, 5 volt, ground, 5 volt, channel 1, channel 2. Just gonna flip it upside down here. So there's the ground, now 5 volt. Channel 1 is gray. Channel 2 is yellow. Just inspect it and make sure there's no solder bridging anything. That all looks good. There's also an option with this receiver to hook up an external battery to it, so even if your flight battery gets ejected, this will continue transmitting your signal, and if your GPS is still connected, it'll continue giving your GPS coordinates. I'm just going to do the standard hookup for it, and then I'll do another video in the future with about how to add the extra battery and so on. Alright, wires are all nicely twisted together now. So now I'm going to conformal coat the back side of the receiver. Just a thin layer, it really don't need a lot here. This is all going to be heat shrunk in a packet together as well. Or not heat shrunk, it's all going to have heat shrink over it afterwards, so. Alright, I'm going to actually go ahead and do basically all of this side. Obviously staying away from the UFL connectors there. Give that a few minutes to dry off, and then we'll look at getting that soldered onto the flight controller. So looking at the flight controller diagram again, the receiver is going to go to the outside row of pins. So ground 5 volt TX2 RX2. So there's ground 5 volt TX2 RX2. So while that's finishing drying up there, I'll get these ones ready. Okay, that receiver's dry now. I mount my receiver on the underside like this, and then I'm going to bring the wires around this way up to the flight controller. So I just want to hold it in position there while I check if these wires need to be shortened or cut to size here. It seems actually pretty close to good. I think I can maybe just tighten the twist on here. It'll use up a little more length, and I'm probably good just leaving it the length that it is. Maybe I did have a little bit extra here, so I'm just going to trim off a tiny bit so they're all even. Alright, now we'll have to strip the silicone off the outside. And we'll tin the wires up here. Alright, so the wires are going to end up coming over here like this from underneath, so I'm just going to sit it over there for now. Let's start with the ground here then. I guess if you're going to hook up some LEDs, you might want to get them plugged or get them soldered in before this part. I like having my wires coming in from this inside. I mean, you could just route your wires to the outside, but it was ground, then 5 volt, which is our red. And then channel 1, which is gray. Oh, actually, let's, I'm going to double check this. Channel 1 is gray, and channel 1 goes to RX2. And then yellow goes to TX2. And that's it. That's receiver done. And so for now, I haven't stuck the receiver down or anything yet. I've just put it underneath this just to stop it from flopping around. But I'm going to get back to that when I put together the back standoffs and mount the antennas. So next here is going to be the GPS. According to the flight controller diagram here, the GPS is going to 5 volt ground, TX3, RX3, SDA, and SCL. So these last 6 pins here by the button. 5 volt ground, TX3, RX3, and then the SCA and SCL. Okay. And nice long wiring harness. Matek always seems to give nice long wires with their GPS units. You can see here the labels for the wires, and it's just reversed on this side. So it's 5 volt then ground. So here on this side it's 5 volt then ground. Then yellow is RX, purple is TX, white is DA, and green is CL. I'm just going to check how long to cut these wires. So it's going to be around about here when I mount it. I want my wires to come up. I'm going to probably use some double-sided tape and stick them to the capacitor here. So, okay, I'm going to cut all my wires to this length. Alright, then for now we can just remove the plug from the GPS. And then, of course, strip the silicone off the wires now. Alright, so for some reason earlier on my GoPro stopped recording, so I've missed some of the GPS installation here, but I'll go through it with you. So on the GPS it says the order of the wires is 5 volt, ground, RX, TX, DA, and CL. So the red one is 5 volt, so I put that to it goes to these last 6 pads on the flight controller here by the button. So the first one, the red wire, 5 volt, and then the black wire, ground. Then the yellow wire goes to T3 because the yellow wire is RX on the GPS, so it goes to TX on the flight controller. And the purple wire is TX on here, so it goes to RX on the flight controller. DA is white, and CL is green. So I've got these two backwards. Because DA is white, and it says here DA goes to the second last one. So DA should go here, and DA is the white wire. So I've got to switch those two around. All right, and then after soldering on the GPS, I put a little bit of sticky tape in the very middle of it, and then mounted it into the mount here. I might put a little couple dabs of hot glue in the corners, maybe to keep it in there a little better. It's going to go like this across here. All right, and then the other thing I did was to put my my SMA connectors in here. So I got the one for the VTX in here, and I've used the spare two screws from the Runcam camera and used those to screw that one SMA in, the one from the VTX. And then this SMA I got from Amazon to go to my, I just bought a 10 pack of them, and that's going underneath, and it's connected to my receiver. And I did the same thing as in the front for the other receiver wire. I've used the other leftover gummy to go through this hole, and I've fed the wire through there. Now I'm going to heat shrink this and then stick it onto that double-sided tape there. And then this just screws over top. Now this mount is the same as the one I did for the front, where it's got a standoff inside there. So when you screw these down, you just screw them down hard and tight. There's no squishy TPU in between the fastener head. It's all solid standoff. I can actually mount my standoffs to these first. So because I've already got my SMA connectors fastened here, I'm not going to be able to lift this up over the standoff ends. So I'm going to mount it to the standoffs first. So I'm going to actually cut a little slot in here for this VTX wire, so it doesn't have to bend quite so harshly. Okay, now that I've cut a little slot in there, I think that's going to make the VTX SMA extension fit a little better. So you're going to have to plug in the VTX now, because it's not going to work afterwards. I'm going to give the cable here a little twist underneath as I set this down so that it twists to the side a bit rather than folding too much. Alright, so that section is ready to screw on at the top. Alright, I'm just going to shrink this up. This kind of heat shrinks really fast and will just melt holes into it if you put the lighter on it too much. Like that. This is really a hairdryer heat shrink. Okay, now that's removed so I can stick it down to the double-sided tape here. I just like having my receiver in the back here, way out of the way of everything. These have to be fully screwed into the standoffs in the bottom before you screw them onto the frame. All right. Just adjust these wires so that sits down. There we go. Now I'm going to stick my GPS wires down like this over top of the capacitor. Let's keep them out of the way. And this leftover wire, the 5 volt from the VTX, I'm going to stick that down over here as well in case I want to use it later. You can also just cut it off short there or pull the pins out of the plug. Put it sideways across there like that. And that'll stick down with the double-sided tape there. And if I really want to make it stay in place there, I can put some electrical tape over it or something. Looks like I'll have just enough space to get a battery strap over top of that. Oh, actually, it won't matter because that's going to be in the middle and the strap comes up over top of this. So that will be fine. Yeah, that's perfect. I think I do also want to use a zap strap here just to stop this wire from moving around too much, causing some vibrations on the flight controller or something. All right, one of the last things left to do here now, conformal coating the top side of the flight controller. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I'm using MG Chemicals 422C silicone conformal coating. So remember, you just want to use enough to coat a layer on top of all the electronics, but not overdo it. And the more you put on, the more difficult it's going to be to work on the flight controller in the future. Now, of course, we want to make sure we stay away from, because remember, this conformal coating will sort of travel up and along surfaces that it touches. So if you put a whole bunch right at the bottom of a plug, then it could travel up the plug a little bit. As you just don't want to get too much, say, on your USB thing here. And if you want to use this button, I haven't used a button on a flight controller in years, but if you ever use the button, make sure you don't cover that. And the barometer was on the other side, so we don't need to worry about that. Oh, remember to remove your piece of tape off the barometer. I guess I should re-edit that in earlier since you can't get to the bottom now. And you just have to make sure, of course, you get underneath the wires. Also, you probably don't want to get, I'm sure it's okay if you get a little bit on your gummy, but don't cover the gummies in the corners with this. So it'll make them harden up a bit. Just make sure I get these pads underneath the wires here. Alright, I think that's everywhere on top. Now remember, we did do the other side of the flight controller, but now that we've heated up these solder points on the sides here, the waterproofing on the other side underneath those points will have gotten hot enough that it's probably compromised. So just need to do a light touch up on the very outside edge where we've been soldering. This part's a little hard to get on camera. And then doing this front part, I'm not going to be able to do this on camera. So I'm just going to do that, get that last bit finished here. Okay, that's it for the waterproofing. And the build is pretty much done here. Oh, and I added a piece of tape over top of this wire just to hold it down because the double-sided tape wasn't wanting to hold it properly. So, and I think I might still add, I think these wires here, I put a zap strap on this GPS wire on the standoff, and I think these ones are okay. They're probably not really going to move too much. The stuff coming from the ones coming from the receiver. I'm just wondering about the VTX wires here. I think these are going to bounce around a bit. I think I might want to put a bit of double-sided tape down here underneath them. Now I will end up covering these LEDs, so maybe I'll try to avoid covering those LEDs with it. Alright, I was going to double-sided tape this, but I think I've changed my mind. I'm going to use a dab of glue. I'm just going to put a little dot of glue right here on the flight controller and fasten that wire, just stick that wire down in it, and then that'll stop it from bouncing around and adding any vibrations to the flight controller or to the gyro. I think I mentioned earlier, but I'm going to do another follow-up video with installing a flywheel finder. And I think I just want to take a look into, because I've read some comments saying that the buzzers on this aren't very loud. So I'm going to take a look and see if you can use let's take a quick look here. There's a spot to add extra wires. Like it seems like you can daisy chain another one onto here. So I'm wondering if I can just add another extra loud buzzer right onto this part. So I'm going to try and see if I can figure out how to upgrade this flywheel finder. And then I'll probably do a video about adding the flywheel finder and a backup battery for the Crossfire receiver. And if you remember, the other prints for the Crossfire antenna in the front and for the receiver in the back here had standoffs in them so that the fasteners went down hard onto the standoffs rather than just squishing TPU. Because these three are fasteners, and here on the GoPro mount, they all help hold the frame together like the standoffs to carbon. So it's the same thing in the GoPro mount. Inside here, there's some 10mm standoffs. So these fasteners go down hard onto the standoffs. There's no squishiness in the frame fastening there. And in the back, these ones do squish onto the TPU because they don't matter on the frame. They just go to press nuts that are pre-installed in the bottom here, so you don't have to worry about messing around with nuts and so on. Just press nuts sitting there in the frame to screw to. Makes it really easy to add the mount here. Like I was saying before, just the one thing with these is you don't want to screw them into the frame like that. Like you have to have these screws all the way into these standoffs. The screws have to be screwed all the way down into the standoff before you start this standoff inside here. I mean, before you start screwing it into the frame. And there's also washers that come with the frame kit that go underneath the fastener here, just to make it a little bit wider so it holds down onto the TPU a bit better. Another thing that's got to be done here is this mount in the front needs a zap strap just to make sure this can't fall out. It's probably fine, you know, it's going to be fine with just one, but I like things to be symmetrical, so I'm going to add two here. All right, I think this glue gun's hot enough now. All right, so we're just going to use this piece of double-sided tape and then to hold that down. And of course add our nuts now to the top of the stack here. You don't want to screw these down tight. I just screw them down till they, you know, a half a turn more than just touches the yellow part. I feel it's touched it now, and I just do another little half turn, and that's it. If you do these up too tight, you'll negate the effect of having the gummies on there to absorb some of the vibration. All right, we're all done with the flight controller and mounting things there. Get the, I think we can get the top plate on now. Alright, so what else is left to do here? Usually slide these feet, or the little landing pads, kind of towards the outside. And then I add one more zap strap on the inside here. And then I'll add a Zap strap up top here for the XT60. Oh, and there's a part that I forgot. Was mentioning to sand off or use a file and smooth off the edges around this section for when you put your power wires up here so they don't get cut. Leave a little bit of slack down the bottom. Pull up whatever I need. There we go. And the bottom XT60, if I'm only using one battery, I'll zap strap it to this arm below. So if I'm flying with this battery and I just need the one XT60, yeah, I just zap strap that other one to one of the arms underneath. Now the only thing left to do for the build is to attach the braces, which I've already got mine on here, but yeah, they look like they're double-sided, but just make sure you'll have to check when you put them one way, the holes will line up on one side but not the other. Then just flip it over and it'll work the other way. And take note that the brace goes like this, turns to the inside, so when they go on like this, and then the opposite side, so they go in towards the middle of the quad. And of course, like all the other fasteners, the fasteners for this will be included with the frame kit. This will be the 16mm M3 button head for the braces all the way through to the motors. And just make sure that you are using a 16mm button head, because if you have one that's a little bit longer, it will go through. Like if it happens to be an 18, it'll go through and hit your windings underneath, possibly. So just always check, get all your motor fasteners all lined up together. They all look the same. Measure them, make sure you got the right ones, and go ahead and finish getting your motors attached. And maybe you want to use some Loctite here. I usually do. I'll get the motors all tightened up just loosely, and then I'll pull out two of them, put Loctite on them, put them back in loosely, then pull out the other two, put Loctite on them, put them back in, and then go through and tighten them all up a little bit at a time. That's the build all finished. I hope you found this helpful and managed to learn something along the way. And thanks very much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.